Hi, everybody. My name is Gregory Duke. I am the database partner for Stopel Analytics Group. Welcome, everybody, today. If you're in the Northeast, I hope you're safe from the flooding there. If you're in the Southwest like I am, I hope you're staying cool. It's going to be about 110 today here in Tucson. I have no idea what it'll be like elsewhere in Arizona. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I've actually been doing for a number of clients these days, and something that I think a lot of institutions are thinking about, especially if they've just done a campaign or they're planning a campaign to start within the next 2 or 3 years, which is data auditing. And another reason I want to talk about this is the sort of thing that a lot of institutions think about during the summer when it's a little harder to raise gifts because people are on vacation, or also you do have the fact that other people are on vacation, you're in the office, you don't have as many tasks to complete for other staff members. And so you have the time to start thinking about how to clean up and look at your database. So the first question is really, what is a data audit? I mean, the big question, when I say data audit, it sounds something really technical and important. That there is this sounds like something that when you hear of an IRS audit or an accounting audit, you think of all these people in suits coming into your office and going through all your documents. And really, a data audit to me it's kind of like saying what's the length of a piece of string. You can identify, I think, things in your database that are working, things that are not working. Really, to me, it's a review of database effectiveness. One of the things that I ran into in my first job when I started working here in the United States in fundraising was, we want to run weekly reports, but we can't do that because of limitations in our database. Or we do run annual reports, but boy, it takes forever to do it. And part of the reason is we don't have data in the right place. The other thing I think a data audit really needs to include is cleanup of data where possible. And this is obviously something that you need to think about in terms of, how can we clean up things that will have the biggest bang for the buck. I mean, it's impossible to clean up a database so well that there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I mean, to go into every, say, contact report and clean up every misspelling, it's really just not as effective as looking at other things that may affect the way you run your institution on a regular basis. Yes, I think Marianne would say, having clean contact reports is important because then you can do analytics on them. But I think that in the long run, or really in the short run, because the summer is over for a lot of institutions in a few weeks when students come back to class in early August, or for other institutions, say where summer vacation doesn't last so long, you really want to try and get as much clean that will affect your institution as possible. So I was asked to do a blog post on data auditing a little while back, and I came up with 3 principles of data auditing for nonprofit institutions. And the first is what I kind of hinted at in the previous slide, that a data audit isn't meant to make your database perfect. A database is a living document. There are many people who touch it every day, who enter things, especially at a larger institution where you have maybe 100 or 200 users of the database, all of whom are adding things in some way, even if they're not adding important things like gifts or addresses. Maybe they're adding contact reports or notes or things. So every day your database changes a bit, and it's really impossible to go and fix every single thing. When I was a kid, I first heard of Murphy's Law, which is if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. And of course, my dad really explained that one to me, is that it really means if anything is capable of going wrong, it will eventually go wrong. And there's a corollary to Murphy's Law, is that the first 90% of a project takes 90% of the time. And then the last 10% takes the other 90% of the time. And I'm kind of learning this. I mentioned before this meeting started, I'm moving in a couple of weeks. And it really does feel like the first 90% of packing up took 90% of the time, and this last 10% is taking up another 90%. You know, suddenly realizing, oh, what am I going to do with all the stuff in the kitchen? Now, with databases, I've often found that you can identify and prioritize certain things in a data audit for cleanup that don't take as much time, but they have a significant effect on your database because of what they change. And I'll get to that in a future slide. So it's best to concentrate on that first 90%, as it were, to look at what's going to have the most effectiveness. And actually, some of these cleanup techniques, as we'll see, are pretty easy to implement, so far as you have the right tools to move things around in your database. The second principle is, when we're going to prioritize, we want to prioritize front-facing changes. So if you only have a time to change part of your database, think about the changes that are going to actually affect your constituents. So especially things like addresses and email addresses. One thing I've noticed is that even if an address gets to a constituent, if it looks bad, if it looks sloppy, like something is misspelled, especially a city is misspelled, or the zip code is wrong, and the institution has to write down, the post office has to write down the correct zip code. It does make your institution look a little non-professional. And so I often say that this is a part where you want to clean things up. The other thing is with addresses, with email addresses and phone numbers, that if you have phone numbers that don't work or email addresses that are corrupt, it affects, obviously, first of all, if you have an email address that's corrupt, if it doesn't have an @ sign, or doesn't have Gmail is misspelled or something, obviously, first of all, it's not going to get to your constituent. But secondly, when you do a health test, or say if you have to do the VSE, you're going to usually mark that down as so this person has an address, email address, so yes, they're contactable, and that is something actually that's changed in the VSE in the last 2 years, that even if they have any email address of any sort and it's not marked do not contact, then they're a contactable alumnus. But if they had a corrupt email address that you're counting as correct, you should really be counting that as a non-contactable person. So it's good to know when you have corrupt email addresses. Same thing with phone numbers. Say you've got a phone number that's only 9 digits long instead of 10 for a US or Canadian alumnus. Well, that's a phone number that's not going to work, and you should really mark that down as an incorrect or bad phone number. The other thing is, how do you report your constituents or donors publicly? Are there places or public things where their names can be seen? I'm thinking of things like annual fund reports or annual reports in a magazine or newsletter you might be publishing. Recently, I've been working with a client that they couldn't figure out why 80,000 of their many constituents were coming up on some of their mailings as Mrs. and Mr. And they realized that some people might want to be called Mrs. and Mr. I think they think there are around 300 people that were hard coded that way in their database, but the rest of them, they couldn't figure out why that was happening. And it took a little tinkering to identify this, but eventually I was able to identify what it was in their database that was causing this issue to happen. And that's an example of, something that it took a while to figure out. It was kind of buried in deep in the database that I was able to puzzle out. But that was worth it because that's something that so many of their constituents were seeing on a regular basis, and obviously they wanted to have it fixed. The third principle of data auditing is to prioritize what I call painful or pain reports. When I started in the business, as I say, we had a number of reports that were difficult or impossible to run. The most, and this has actually happened not just at my first institution, but most institutions I've worked for, that there were a lot of reports that needed to be repaired post-production. What would happen would be, for example, we'd run a campaign report, and then we'd need to make sure that certain gifts weren't in that report. Or when we put together a new campaign report, we'd have to remember, okay, we have to exclude these 5 constituents because their gifts aren't supposed to be in the campaign. And that to me seemed a little, difficult to remember for each report, that you had to have a list on the wall that said, okay, these are the 5 people that aren't supposed to be in this report. Or every week we needed to subtotal certain parts of the report. Oh yeah, Jessica says, run into this all the time. Yeah, I am surprised how many times I've run into it myself at many different institutions. And sometimes it's a little political, that, it's the sort of thing that, like, well, Mr. Smith didn't want this to fall into this category, but we don't want to talk about it too much. And I'd say, well, let's code it in the database in such a way that it doesn't appear in the report. Well, I don't know if people should see that if they go into the database. And I just, at that point, I just kind of start rolling my eyes like, okay, well, we got to figure out another way for this. And for subtotaling and other pieces, what I've often seen is what I sometimes call the Taco Bell approach to reporting, is that we have these 6 or 7 elements to the report, and depending on how the VP or someone might feel, oh yeah, Kelly, and I will get to this. I will get to how to exclude them in the future slide. But I was going to say with the kind of Taco Bell report, depending on how they feel on a certain day, they want that report in in a different combination. So the joke about Taco Bell is that they've only got 6 ingredients, and everything on their menu is just a different combination of those 6 ingredients. or it might be, boiled or fried or baked. But all the menu items are just 6 ingredients. And somehow Taco Bell has been able to succeed with that idea, even here in Tucson, which has great Mexican food, and somehow Taco Bell seems to thrive here too. So starting off with fixing pain reports, yes, the very first thing that I always suggest when you want to exclude something is identifying a tag to add a tag somewhere in your database to identify a specific category. And this can be something at the campaign, fund, or appeal level. It could be something even as granular at a gift level, that a specific gift should be included in a campaign, or even in an appeal or a fund. The reason I sometimes say I'm calling this a tag is when obviously I'm trying to be kind of CRM neutral here, but every CRM to some extent has a note field, or it's often called in Raiser's Edge an attribute field, where you can put information that will say, this gift should not be counted in a particular campaign or in a specific reporting structure. And as long as you don't go overboard with these, because what I often see, once you start tagging gifts as unreportable in certain reports, then all of a sudden that can kind of blossom into a whole series of different tags to remove gifts from different reports. So I would kind of sit down and think about what reports are we struggling with, where we have to change things in post-production, and what's the simplest way of tagging those things that have to be changed in post-production to remove them from reports. And this also covers inclusionary gifts as well as exclusionary gifts, because sometimes, I remember one institution, we had a comprehensive campaign that started in 2003, and I'm giving away my age here, but there were 2 or 3 gifts that were made before 2003 that had to be counted in the campaign. And at first, we would literally type in the report, and if gift ID equals blank blank or blank blank. And finally, I said, why don't we just change the campaign title of these gifts to our comprehensive campaign, even though they didn't show up during that time period. And that obviously fixed the issue. Kelly says, we do a tag in a worksheet that has the explanation of what and why. And I think that's a really good thing to do, so that people don't go into the gift and go, oh, this doesn't look right, this shouldn't be part of this campaign, and just delete the tag. If you have an explanation, then that future proofs that tag. Let me check the time here. Let's see. So this actually ties into reports as well, but it's also a cleanup issue. And when I talk about this, I'm thinking about a number of clients. In fact, I'm going to be cleaning up some drop down menus for a client today. Drop down menus are the kind of the bread and butter of gift entry. I'm working with yet another client who has an issue with information that was typed into a reference field. And when you type information into a reference field, you run into all kinds of potential issues. For example, with this particular client, I've never seen as many spellings for the word scholarship as I have for this client. But the other thing, and the more kind of insidious thing that happened with this client, is that they put information into this field that didn't belong there. So now we have not only the information that was originally supposed to go in there, but also lots of things about notes about the donor, information about split gifts that was just easy to add to this field, because it appears on the first, it happens to appear on the first page of the gift information. And because you could add anything to the field, people just added it there. Now, on the other hand, while drop-down menus do prevent that thing from happening by limiting what you can put into a field, they still are subject to misspellings or duplicate entries, or even things that just shouldn't be there. I still remember cleaning up tables at my first institution and finding things like names of scholarships and names of scholarship, and suddenly a zip code appears. So how that zip code appear, I don't know, but that's an easy thing to go in and clean up. Depending on your institution, this cleanup area might be called configuration. That's what it's called in Razor's Edge. Tables, I believe that's all true. And then tessitura. And a lot of CRMs allow you to change or merge misspelled or duplicate entries kind of on the fly. In other words, you don't need to change any records to change the tables. So if the word scholarship is misspelled in a drop-down menu, you can go in there, change the spelling. It will automatically change in all the linked records, or for merges, it will automatically merge all of the records, so that, say you have a John Smith scholarship and a J Smith scholarship, changing the J's, merging those two will merge everyone into John Smith or J Smith, depending on what you pick, and the records will change automatically. With other CRMs, you can at least identify the records by doing a search of those records that have those misspellings or other things in the dropdown, and then you can use your CRM's global import or other change field to be able to change them. As I'm learning with a lot of the new CRMs, there are not so many change features, and so I've been kind of stuck going in and changing records one by one occasionally, which I haven't done in many years. But some, like I say, some of the smaller databases just don't have this function. But it's still easy to identify the records just by seeing what's misspelled in the tables, and so you can see what's out there. So I talked about front-facing things like phone numbers, emails, address. And first, does anybody have any questions on what we've gone through? You can type in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Whoops. And I apologize, sometimes I've been moving too many slides in advance. I'm running off my laptop, which does not have a mouse, and so the little touchpad is a little too sensitive sometimes. So if there are no questions, I know we're starting to run short on time. I have been doing this kind of work for a number of clients in the last, say, 5 years, because these are places that are easy to clean, but they're also things that, as I say, really affect an institution's phone, email, and mailing rate. And there's also a lot of easy shortcuts to do all of these things. So as I'm a little disappointed Mary Ann isn't here so she could chide me again on Excel. But this is actually a really useful way of using Excel to clean up a database. So for phone numbers, we know that every United States phone number is supposed to have 10 digits. If you happen to have the hyphens to separate the area code, the exchange, and the 4-digit number, then the length of that is going to be 12. If you have parentheses between around the area code, a space, exchange, hyphen, 4 numbers, then the length is going to be 14. And if you've got all of your phone numbers formatted the same way, they should all be the same length. Obviously, foreign phone numbers are a different matter, but if most people don't really call their foreign alumni or constituents anyway, so really I only want to check US, Canadian, and some of the Caribbean phone numbers are all on the same exchange. So an easy way to make sure you have clean, or at least phone numbers that are capable of being dialed, is to export them to Excel and then check the length of each one of them. And if one of them is a different length, then it's something that can't be called. So let me just go over to a dummy phone list I have. So we have here a kind of dummy list of phone numbers. And I'm just going to call this column length. And what we need here, and let me just blow this up so that it's easier to see. This is not going to work when you're showing it to people. The formula we need to check for length of field in Excel is simply equals LEN, and then parentheses, and then the field that we're checking. So in this case, B2, close parentheses. So a pretty simple formula, and we click on that. The length is 9. And since I was gonna say, since I have formatted these as a phone number, we're only counting the number of digits. And that's another thing I should say. Excel has a specific format for numbers, and phone numbers in particular. You can, if you click on format and number special, you can format the phone numbers in this area code as the parentheses and then the exchange. So when you have phone numbers formatted in that way, it'll only count the number of digits and not the actual parentheses and space and hyphen. Either way, if you simply take the length of each record and just look at the ones that don't fit, in this case, we should have everything being 10, because obviously these are the ones that look right, but we can see that there are a bunch of them that don't fit, and we can look into the constituent record and see if we can fix them. Unfortunately, with some of these, we're going to have a tough time, because if we don't have enough numbers in the area code or in the in the 4-digit exchange, I mean 4-digit actual number, we're kind of out of luck unless we get a clean record from a phone append company. Nowadays, in the old days, I would have said if we had a corrupt phone number, we didn't have an area code for a phone number, I would say, append the area code for the area where they are. So say if they were in Buffalo, then they're going to be a 716, or New York City, it'd be a 210 or whatever, 201. The problem with that is people mostly have cell phones now. And when people move from one place to another, they often keep their cell phone. In fact, I live in Tucson, but my phone number starts 716. And when I move to my next place in a month, I'm going to be keeping my phone because that's the phone number that people know I have. So the fact that I live in Tucson, which the area code here is 520, you wouldn't want to append that, because if you didn't know that you didn't know my phone was supposed to have a 716 area code, you might think, oh, he lives in Tucson, we'll append 520, but that wouldn't be the correct phone number. It would be someone else's number. So these days I say if a phone number is missing an area code, treat it as incorrect, simply because we don't know anymore whether someone has an area code that's attached to where they live, or if it's a cell phone that might be from somewhere else. So the next place that's fairly easy to look at for especially corrupt information is emails, because emails have to have a specific format. First of all, they have to have exactly one @ sign. And in Excel, it's easy to identify how many @ signs or other pieces of text a cell has by using the COUNTIF function. And there's also another way to check to make sure that your emails look correct. And let me go back to our dummy file. So firstly, let's take a look at these. And sorry for the lame emails. I just was trying to come up with dummy emails. And so this is what I came up with at the last minute. First of all, we're going to check to make sure that each of these emails has exactly one @ sign. And what we need to do is type in the formula COUNTIF in parentheses. Now our range is going to be B2 again, and comma. Now we have to type in equals, because we're looking for text, a asterisk, which tells us anything can come before the text I'm about to type, @ sign, another asterisk that says anything can come after the text we've just typed, and another quotation mark, close the parenthesis, and it tells us correctly that we have one @ sign. And if we click here, that was supposed to, the second was supposed to be 2. And I'm not sure, it's count. Sorry about that. It does tell us that that constituent 3 has 0. And I believe where I've made this mistake is, can't be COUNTIFs, no. I'm not sure why. All right, I'm going to have to, I will email everybody a correction on that one. I'm not sure why that I usually I get these things in Excel, but I'm not sure why that happened. I've done this so many times. But yeah, this is a way at least to tell us when there is no @ sign. It's very rare that you'll see 2 @ signs in an email. I've only encountered it a handful of times. It's much more common that you won't see any @ sign at all because someone has put in a website or a phone number in an email, in a place where there's supposed to be an email. And then you won't have an @ sign. And the @ sign really is only used for emails these days. So that at least will tell you, this is not supposed to be an email address. But there's another thing you can do in Excel that will kind of clean up your, help you clean up that emails. And it's a pretty easy thing, but it's not something that I've seen, I'd say used a lot, but it's a quite useful tool. And that is to use a little technique or wizard called text to columns. What text to columns does is that it takes a field and it splits it up based on the text that you put into the text to columns. I know that's a little vague, but let's go through this. When you click on the text to columns, it brings up this wizard saying, okay, how do we want to split up this text field? We can split it up by telling it, okay, split up every 5 characters. But in this case, we want to split the text using a characters saying, such as commas or tabs separate each field. And in this case, what we want to split this up by is period, because we want to see if bits of what are called the domain, which is everything in an email that goes after the @ sign, if bits of the domain are misspelled. So if I click on other and then period, what it's going to do is it's going to split up into columns every part of the domain, and each period is kind of like a limiter for the domain. So everything before the first period will appear in column 1, everything before the second period will appear in column 2, and etc. So now we can click on finish, and what we see here is everything. This is what appears before the first column. And if we actually can even make this a little better by, we're going to add another column here, and we're going to split off the name, which is everything that goes before the @ sign, and just to make sure I don't have an error, I'm going to get rid of this one here. And then everything that goes after the domain, after the @ sign, will go into this column. I'm going to remove that hyperlink just to make sure we don't have an error. Now I'm going to go back in here, and instead of a period this time, we're going to split everything up by @ sign. Now when we finish, so we've got the name, and then the first part of the domain goes here, the second part would go here, and if there's a third part, and I've seen as many as 5 parts, it goes here. Now it's easy to take a look at each of these and see where we might have an issue. And here we see, webinars at stopel.com. We see that .com is the .com's part is misspelled, and also here and here. We also see that there's a stopel.net, and we might realize, well, that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, especially if we sort these columns. I often see things like gmail.net or the usual thing I see is I call it gamail.com or gamule.com, where someone has transposed the M and the A in Gmail. And that's really easy to see by sorting this document, and I'll just this to make it look a little nicer. So if I sorted this out, and how I usually sort it is by the first domain and then the second part of the domain. And you can see here that the .cm in Stopel is going to stick out. Also, you're going to see, okay, all these are stopel.com, and then all of a sudden there's a stopel.net. And the nice thing about this is this can change, you can change this to .com, and now you're probably going to have a valid and mailable email address. It just might have been typed in wrong at the time. Obviously, you're not changing anything in the name portion of the email, and so therefore, this is something that can be fixed. And I'd say about 9 times out of 10, when you change something in the domain, it converts into a valid email that actually is useful. So this is a way of getting more email addresses into your system at a very fast pace. Now, one of the last things I'm going to talk about are addresses, because I have 2 things to fix addresses. And the first really is pretty similar to phone how we talk about phone numbers, but this is with zip codes. Obviously, you've got 5-digit zip codes and you've got zip plus 4. But that essentially means that every zip code in the United States is supposed to be either 5 or 10 digits. And you can do the same thing I showed you with phone numbers for zip codes. In Canada, you have every address's postal code is supposed to be. Let me get this straight. I lived in Canada. I should get this right. Letter, number, letter, space, and then number, letter, number. And so if the length of the postal code isn't 7 with the space and 6 without, then it's an address that won't have a valid postal code. You can do the same for some other countries. I won't go too far into the weeds because I'm not as up to par with addresses from other countries that I have with the United States and Canada. But you can also identify blanks simply by exporting an address and then looking for the blanks. I hope someone hasn't asked a question because I just missed. That's an easy thing to see if it's just put out into an Excel sheet. One other thing, that this is just a simple kind of tangent. These are all countries I've seen recently or sometimes recently, sometimes not recently in databases. None of these countries now exist or ever existed. For Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands are parts of the United States, and if you have somewhere marked as country Puerto Rico, that should be changed to country is the United States and state is PR. And the same with Guam, which is GU, and Virgin Islands, which is VI. The nice thing about changing those is the people who live in those territories are American citizens. You can send them letters at the same cost as anyone in your same city, because the United States doesn't charge anymore for, only if it's the US Virgin Islands. The British Virgin Islands are not part of the United States. Um, it's been rare that I've seen anyone in the Virgin Islands of either U.S. or United States. I mean, U.S. or Britain, but yeah, if the Virgin Islands in the United States, the code is VI. Macedonia is now called North Macedonia after a long battle with the country of Greece. They agreed on being called North Macedonia. Swaziland is now called Eswatini. Turkey is actually now spelled differently. I didn't have it down here, but I know that that's changed. And when I first started at a place in a certain place, I found someone who lived in the country of Newfoundland, which hasn't been a country since 1949. So yeah, sometimes, and then sometimes, of course, you'll see countries that are just accidentally put in there, states or other things. And speaking of state and provinces, the same issue. I often see Quebec as PQ, which it was called for some time, but it's not that anymore. It's QC. And another question you should ask yourself is, should you be using state names for places other than the US and Canada? I've often seen people putting in their databases, say, states from Australia, or trying to put county codes into the United Kingdom, which I scratch my head at, because I lived in the United Kingdom for 7 years and I don't think anyone used county codes when I lived there. So if it happens that you have a large number of constituents from Australia or Mexico, for example, which also has state abbreviations, I would think about putting information about those states from those countries into your database. But if you have only a handful of people, say you have 5 people from Australia, does it make sense to code those into your state tables, which it's going to take up loads of space every time you're trying to type in Vermont? Victoria comes up from Australia. It's something to think about when you are, when you're adding things to your database. What should go into your tables? Yes, it's technically correct to add Victoria or say Guadalajara to the state area in your name in your database, but it's just as easy to put comma Victoria or comma Guadalajara, and it looks just the same. I know I'm running out of time. U.S. city and zip code cleanup. One of the most common problems with zip codes is that the 0 and 00 will sometimes disappear from a zip code. And unfortunately, this is an Excel problem when you're adding things from a list. And yes, this is definitely at the feet of Excel. I apologize on behalf of Excel. But this is something that's easy to see, again, when you export, if the 0 and 00 disappear. Now, last but not least, I have only a few minutes to show off one of the last cleanup bits I've got. Oh, and Ruth, I think Ruthie is using my Excel chatter to advertise her. Oh, and this is Brandy is put in to advertise the Excel training session that Marianne and Ruthie are going to be putting on from in Springfield, Massachusetts on October 16th to the 17th. So that's in the chat if you want to see it. So very quickly, address cleanup is, if it goes through a third party, it's expensive. And especially making sure that the zip codes match the places where someone says they're supposed to be. There is a quick way around it, but it's a little complex. So if anyone is interested, I have this list of all zip codes in the United States with information such as its location, state, city, county is here, and some population information, also what time zone they're in. This is provided by the Census Bureau. If I had more time, I'd show you where I pulled it from, but it is absolutely free. It's information provided by the US government and the US Census Bureau. And the nice thing about this is you can see this zip code belongs to this city. So if I have a zip code that isn't supposed to belong to that city, I should be able to figure it out pretty quick. Now, in order to do that, we use what's called the VLOOKUP field. And so very quickly, I'm just going to show that. By the way, you can see that there's the leading zero is missing from these New England addresses that I've just kind of thrown in here. But in this case, the formatting for the US zip file will allow me to handle this even without the zero. So if you're familiar with the VLOOKUP field, you just type in VLOOKUP, and we point at the zip code. Our table array is going to be a copy of zips. And if you're not as familiar with VLOOKUP, I know that's something that's going to be in the training session. Also, I've talked about VLOOKUP on previous webinars and training sessions. So it's a useful tool, especially when you're matching things like this. Our zip code is in column 4. Exact match, so we say false. And so we can see that the zip code is supposed to match my missing 1033 is Granby, and we had it correct in our list. Now all I need to do is just copy, and what we can see is some of these are not matching. So Kennebunk in Maine does not have this zip code. In fact, this zip code doesn't even exist. So we better check this one. We kind of see that because we have all these Massachusetts zip codes and this Maine one suddenly appears. The other thing we can do now is, now that we have this, I'm going to copy and paste the text. Now I just need a field that says if our lookup city is not the same as our city from our export, then we say no problem. Otherwise, we leave it blank. So when I copy this, we can see there's a problem here. Oh, that's because this city was misspelled. So all we need to do is just fix that misspelling. And there may be other issues. Do you ever use index match instead of VLOOKUP? Sometimes, yes. I'm just used to VLOOKUP, but index match has some other features that are very useful. In this case, I'd use VLOOKUP. Just like I say, it's familiar, and also if we wanted to check for things that were wrong and not necessarily misspelled, I could choose true to say a close match is acceptable in VLOOKUP. But yeah, index match is also quite useful for matches like this. I was just going to say here, just to look at some, see if we can see some other potential errors. I'll just sort by column H. Let's sort it Z to A. So now we can see there's a bunch of zip codes that don't match because I need to do a zip 5. I was just doing this in a hurry. And but you can see here's another one that doesn't have a match here. This is the one at Manchog. And if I scroll down here enough, like I say, I should have done zip 5. Just didn't think about it so here's a few problem ones. And you can see that there's some misspellings. You can also see that in some cases, there are some, here's someone in Webster who marks himself down as Dudley. This is an issue because, especially in upstate New York, for some reason, people often call themselves by a suburb name that sounds a little bit nicer than the actual zip code name. So you might see someone in zip code 14221 calling themselves Williamsville instead of Buffalo. Technically, they are Buffalo, and Williamsville doesn't actually exist in the U.S. zip code map. But at least you can take a look at these. Oh, here's another misspelling. For example, Hopkinson instead of Hopkinton, or here they're not Orcutt instead of Dracut. So yeah, you can see how matching this zip code, and if you're interested in having the having a copy of that zip code map, just let me know. Like I say, it's free off the U.S. Census Bureau, so I'm not taking anything from anybody. So, all right. Any questions today, or any other things that someone might want to put in the data audit? Well, thank you, Chris. It's going to be a hectic move. Oh yes, and that's next water cooler chat is August 8th. I will not be at that chat because that's going to be my 50th birthday. So, and also that's the last day of my move out. That's actually the day I'll be arriving at my new place. So, oh, thank you. All right. Well, if you have any questions later, just email me. My email is greg@stuffpal.com, or email Ruthie if you're interested in attending the training session in Springfield, Massachusetts later this year in October. Thank you all for coming today, and see you later.